thank you all for coming. I know Ed and Gigi planned this event because they wanted to bring to Long Island experts from all over the world, really, in different issues to help figure out how to save Long Island. Because really all of our issues can be solved locally, and really locally is the only way we really can affect true change. I mean, obviously we can see that year after year we try to use the electoral process to affect change, and nothing really happens. But if we can concentrate on locally, then eventually, if everybody does that, eventually we can change the bigger picture. So, I want to introduce our two guests, two guys who have been influential in me and my kind of journey to truth and liberty, I guess you could say. Bill Still is an author and a filmmaker that I'm sure most of you have seen his films. I know that The Money Masters was the second film that I watched. Zeitgeist was the first. And then Money Masters I watched the whole series. And it really educated me. So I really appreciate him for that. He's an author. He's written for USA Today and the LA Times. He's an award-winning filmmaker. The Money Masters has been seen, I think it's one of the top seen films on the internet. It's been viewed more times pretty much than most other films. Maybe it's up there with Zeitgeist, right? His most recent film is called Jekyll Island, and that is a history, basically, of what led up to Jekyll Island and the creation of the beast, as we call it. And you can check that out at jekyll-island-themovie.com. You can purchase it there. And then Bob Murphy is another really great economist and teacher. And I've sat through some of his lectures at different events up in New Hampshire as part of the Liberty Forum and Pork Fest. If you guys have not been to those events, those are really great too. He's an NYU educated PhD. He is the senior economist at the Initiative for Energy Research. Institute for Energy Research. He's the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Capitalism, and also Lessons for the Young Economist. And he has also issued a challenge to Paul Krugman to debate him, Austrian versus Keynesian economics. He raised $100,000 that would have been donated to a food bank in New York had Paul Krugman taken him up on his offer. But to this day, Paul Krugman still refuses to accept the challenge. So, Mr. Krugman, the challenge is still open. Be a man. And without further ado, I want to give each of them a few minutes to talk about, if you could in just 3 minutes talk about basically your economic philosophy. Mr. Still, why don't you go first?
I've got to have this work.
Okay.
So I can't do it.
So Bob, you go first. I'll get that working.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Danny. Thanks everyone for coming. As he said, the function of this event is to try to give people a wide range of quick information from experts on various issues. And so what Bill and I are going to try to do here is get you to see that the so-called experts, the people, the authorities that are in charge of our money and banking institutions are not the smartest guys in the room, and they're definitely not your friend. And so but you're going to see, I think our diagnosis is going to be very similar, but then what we think ought to be done, we're going to see is going to be different. So that's the purpose of tonight's debate, is to try to flesh out those differences. So very quickly, what I am here to representing is what's called the Austrian School of Economics. For those of you who got into this stuff because the Ron Paul campaign, that's the school of thought that he endorses. They believe in the free market. They think that money should be produced by the market and not by the government, just like the market should produce TVs and computers and cars, and you wouldn't want to have a group of so-called experts determining what the price of oil should be or how many cars should be produced. By the same token, the Austrians say, why would we have a group of people determining what the interest rate ought to be or how much money there should be in the economy? That's not, there should be no such agency of government at all doing that. Let the market decide that. In particular, the reason this is so relevant, and I would encourage you to read up on what's called Austrian economics, if you haven't done so before, is that they have a theory of what causes the business cycle, and that's very relevant for understanding the crisis that hit in 2008, and then why what they've been doing since then is the exact wrong thing. So just really briefly, remember that the dot-com bubble burst 99 and 2000, and at the time then Fed Chair Alan Greenspan slashed interest rates, and that's what you're supposed to do according to the textbook, according to CNBC and so forth. That's what you do to stimulate an economic recovery when there's a crash. And the Austrians say that that's the wrong thing, that that just gives the wrong signals to business people. Effectively, we replaced the dot-com bubble with the housing bubble. And so that bought us a few years, but of course just made the situation fester. So by the same token, the Austrians say, in 2008, now Bernanke's at the helm, he did the same thing, but times 10, bringing interest rates way down, pumping in more money. So yeah, it bought us a few more years, but we're going to have another crash, and that's going to make what we faced in 2008 look like a walk in the park. So Merry Christmas.
Yeah. When is this crash going to be?
We'll take questions after the after the debate.
Well, the problem is that banks create 97% of all national monies as an interest-bearing debt. Most people think that the government creates the money. That's just not the case. Banks create the vast majority of all money. That makes it rather difficult to fix the problem unless you understand that. It's not, my mantra is, it's not what backs money that's important, it's who is in control of the quantity. Right now, commercial banks are completely and totally in control of the quantity. You have an entity called the Federal Reserve System disguising itself as an entity of government, thereby claiming that government is controlling the quantity, when that's not the case. The Fed is merely a corporation. They are, by their own admission, a corporation. Federal courts have repeatedly ruled that they are a corporation. The stockholders of this corporation are the commercial banks of this nation. A corporation cannot do anything other than serve the interests of their stockholders. Thereby, the Fed can never serve the public interest. It always must serve the banking interest, and that's exactly what you've seen transpire over the last 4 or 5 years. As I said, the only money that the U.S. government does not create are the coins in your pocket. That's it. That's about 3% of the money supply. We can't re-establish national sovereignty until this unholy connection between government and the banking community is broken. And so now I want to, as an example of that, I want to play a little piece of a video of a guy made in Israel. He explains it very interestingly.
The bank. You know something about bank. When I was in Israel, I discovered how the Israeli banks keep the biggest political parties under control through short-term call loans.
Okay, my name is Yair Olmert, O-L-M-E-R-T. Y-A-I-R is the first name.
You're an attorney in Tel Aviv?
No, not in Tel Aviv. Near Tel Aviv, I was until 2002 the owner of one of the most important firms that served the bank.
You know something about bank financing of political parties here in Israel?
Yes, of course. Most of the major political parties are financed by the banks in a certain way, what we call on-call loans, okay?
These are short-term loans?
These are short terms that become long terms because they are not called. They are there to make sure that the parties behave and do whatever the banks want.
And so what you mean by short-term is that they can call the note on almost no notice. 30 days, 60 days.
60 days mostly. Yeah. Or 90 days sometimes. Mm-hmm. But anyway, you know, the political leader doesn't know when the bank will decide and why he will decide to call on the loan. So he just has to be a good guy.
A good guy, yeah. Has to do what he thinks the banks want him to do.
Do what he thinks the bank wants him to do, and sometimes they also call them to the banks and tell them what they want them to do.
And how significant are these loans? Are they just little loans, or are they big
No,
loans?
we are talking about loans of also sometimes tens of millions of dollars. And it is something like 3 times or 5 times the assets of the political party. So
calling in all these loans would break these political parties, and they know it.
Of course, of course. And
So this is a significant power.
this is not a significant power, this is an absolute power.
An absolute power.
And, it is well known here in Israel that the parties do whatever they want, except touching the bank system too much.
So what do you think we should do about this? What would be the first step?
I don't want to take up too much of my time, but anyway, I think you get the idea here. This is this unholy alliance between the banking community and government. Political science has developed a term for this. It's called plutocracy, and that's ruled by the rich, and that's what we have today. And you can paint all these fancy economic terms on it however you want, but that's what it all boils down to. And in this country, the one thing that you have to do, the first step that you have to do, is to eliminate the ability of the federal government to borrow money. Because the borrower becomes servant to the lender, and ultimately the lender controls not only the economic condition, but the political situation as well. And that is the basic problem.
Yes.
All right, so you pretty much both agree that the Federal Reserve System is a problem that needs to be dealt with. So what solutions can you offer? Bob, you can go first. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, can you just give me like a minute warning?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so like I said, I think we're initially in agreement in terms of our diagnosis of the main problem. Let me elaborate a little bit on one of the points that Bill raised, and he said that it's the banks that are creating the money, and I agree with that it's what's known as fractional reserve banking, and I think all of us, you vaguely know this, even people when they first start using banks have a vague idea that when you go and give them $100, they don't just go put it in a drawer with your name on it and just leave it there and then pay you interest on it. Obviously, the reason the banks are able to pay you interest on that is because they go lend most of your money out. And that's why, you have the famous scenes in It's a Wonderful Life when there's the bank run. That's what makes a bank run possible, is because if everyone showed up at the same time to take their money out that they think is in the bank would say, well, no, it's not. So I gave it to Mary, I gave it to George, so thank you, that was my impression. So that is a problem, and in the limited time constraints we have here, we're not going to be able to get into exactly what's so wrong with that beyond the obvious that, wait a minute, that something's fishy when the bank's creating money effectively out of thin air. But Bill and I agree that it's not just the central bank, the Federal Reserve, that's at fault. It's the commercial banks have the power to do that. Where I think we do disagree is that the Austrians typically will say the reason historically commercial banks have gotten away with that kind of behavior is that governments would give them a pass, that when customers would show up and say, hey, I want my money, you're supposed to keep it on deposit, the bank would say, sorry, we don't have it, that the government would give them a pass. For example, FDR's banking holiday. So the Austrians, as long as government's not giving special privileges and legal favors to banks, giving them the ability to renege on their contracts, this practice of what's called fractional reserve banking would be kept down to a minimum. Let me just point you to Murray Rothbard's book, The Mystery of Banking, walks through all this in much better detail than I can give you here if you're interested in this and want to see this fleshed out, and it's online for free, it's a PDF. So very quickly in conclusion, before we turn over to Bill here, what I would want to do again is get the government out of it altogether. I predict that what the market would do is return to primarily gold and silver as the money that people would use. There would be private mints that would stamp coins. Banks would, you could put your money on deposit with a bank and they would have to keep most of it there because they know if they ever got caught with their pants down and loaned too much of it out and people showed up that bank would go out of business, that the government wouldn't bail them out. And so I think it would provide a much more stable foundation. The point of money is not to stimulate, it's just to provide a framework for people, for accountants to be able to make calculations, for people to have a framework for making long-term investment plans, and for that you need a very stable, what I would call hard money, and that's what the market would give us, and that governments historically have done everything they could to get people away from using gold and silver. So the last point is, it's not that the U.S. went off the gold standard in '33. FDR had to use big prison sentences and fines to force everyone to turn their gold, and it was illegal to even write contracts based on the price of gold. So that's why I predict that the market would go back and embrace gold and silver as the money to be used. But again, it's not that I'm for forcing people to use gold. I just want to get government out of the way and let people voluntarily choose whatever money they want to use.
I don't know where to start with you, Bob.
I heard a big sigh when he mentioned Rothbard.
My stunning good looks?
5 minutes, Bill.
Rothbard, by his own admission, was an anarchist. This is the basic difference that we're going to have. Bob and the Austrians have absolutely zero faith in government, and that's not a difficult position to have right now, because right now government is completely controlled by the banking sector. But the solution is not to discard government. The solution is to take government back. And the first step in order to do that is to eliminate the ability of the federal government to borrow. But what's the one defining characteristic of the last 2,500 years of human development? What's the one defining characteristic? It's been the ability of us to organize, we the little people, to organize in little national groups and experiment with self-governance. And that's the only possible way we can oppose the money master system, as I call it, the system that buys governments and thereby through one ruse or another imposes its dictatorial will. If you don't have, there's only two places you can put the money power. It's either, as it is today, in the hands of the banking sector, the money master system, or into the hands of governance. Bob's utopian dream of an unregulated gold money system, we have this system probably from the 1870s until the 1930s. We have this system. He had his way. It was a completely gold-dominated system throughout the Roaring '20s. Take any look at the S&P, the stock market graph during the Roaring '20s. The gold money did absolutely zero to control the quantity of money. It's not what backs the money, it's who controls the quantity. And we the people will never be in control of that quantity. It will always be controlled by the richest people on this planet who can, in an instant, the flip of a switch through electronic trading, buy up the quantity of gold, buy up a significant quantity of gold. You cannot do it that way. They had their gold money system during the Roaring '20s. Did that prevent that wild inflation of the market? No, it didn't do a thing to it. We had the gold money system during the subsequent depression. Did that do a thing to prevent the depression? No, not a thing. And the reason is because most of the money is not this stuff. Most of the money is little electronic digits that the banks make up out of nothing. So attaching this money to gold only controls 3% of the money. It does nothing to actually do what we need to do, and that's have money serve the public interest.
So Bob, what's your response to the fact that he says the gold standard was tried and failed?
Okay, a couple things. So first of all, again, I am not saying I'm for the gold standard if that means the government issues money and then promises to back it up with a certain amount of gold. Okay, I mean, he's saying I had my way in the 1920s. Well, no, of course that wasn't what I wanted. The Fed was formed in 1913, and we're both crystal clear that we think that's a horrible system. All right, the government gave these special privileges to commercial banks, allowed them to engage in fractional reserve banking from even before the time of the Fed. And you can trace to see when these banking panics were as the periods when the commercial banks inflated and then got nervous and it crashed, all right? So that's the mentality, that the realization of that pattern is what led the Austrian economists to realize that, wait a minute, that the banking system is what creates the boom-bust cycle, all right? So we actually agree a lot more than the table pounding would suggest, all right? That the question is, what exactly do we want to do about it? And so we're both in agreement that the governments and the banks get in cahoots, and that, in fact, actually the bankers are the ones that are, have the longevity, and they're the ones in charge. And so I would say the way to get rid of that is not to say, well, we the people need to take over the government, because we're never going to be as organized and as have influential over the government apparatus as these rich bankers are. And so what I would say is we need to realize, don't give the government the ability to hurt us in this fashion. Don't give them ultimate control over the money, because we know it's not going to be a plebiscite of the normal people ultimately controlling those levers. And so the way you eliminate that threat is to distribute the power and return it, and say, let people voluntarily decide what money to use. So again, when I say I predict it would be gold, it's not the operation of the gold standard that the government ties the US dollar back to gold. It's to let people in the market decide and get the government out of money and banking altogether.
It sounds to me like the crux of this argument is really anarchy versus minarchy. It seems to me that Bob is an anarcho-capitalist, while Bill is advocating more for minimal government intervention in the economic system. Is that, am I reading that right?
The constitutional structure, yeah. That's why the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, was such an unusual document. And you know, I've done a lot of international traveling, and you know, you can talk all you want about the evils of the United States, but still, especially in this world of monetary reform, people around this world still look to us to figure it out. It's like, okay, you guys figure it out, and then you know they still believe the United States is the root source of freedom, and the root source of American freedom is. You said something, it threw me. I'm terrible at this. That's why I hate this. I'm just going to have to pass at this point. I lost my place in my brain.
Okay, we're going to take audience questions in just a moment. So start thinking about what you want to ask. I want to kind of throw out a wild card question about Bitcoin. Give me a couple minutes each, 3 minutes each on your opinion on Bitcoin and whether this is a legitimate alternative currency. Could there be some hope in an electronic currency? Give me your opinion on that.
Okay, yeah. So with Bitcoin, and again, if people want to use that, that's great. So what my biggest thing, or the thing I would say in terms of public policy, what should the government do about Bitcoin, is nothing. That I don't want the government penalizing it or encouraging it. Just let people use it if they want to, and the government has no business, cracking down on it or saying, oh, I think it's used by drug dealers, therefore we're suspicious. Just stay out of it. Let people use it if they want. In terms of the economics of it, the thing that's really interesting about Bitcoin that would make it, in a certain respect, even harder than gold and silver. Technically, if everyone's using gold coins, there could, someone could have a huge discovery, and that could inflate the market, right? It's much easier for governments to create money or banks to create electronic money than it is to dig up gold. But strictly speaking, like an asteroid could fall and shower us with 100 billion tons of gold or something, and so that would wreck the system if it were based on gold. With Bitcoin, it's mathematically guaranteed to have a certain finite amount, and so that's why, just as an economist, it's sort of an interesting concept. So I don't have any skin in the game one way or the other. I just like to sit back and referee arguments. I would say, as a final thing, that a lot of people, it seems, who are very skeptical of Bitcoin, they're throwing arguments at it, when it was at $20, say, oh, it's clearly a bubble, and it would go down to 18, say, see? And then it would just keep ratcheting it up, and every time it would dip, it's we told you. And so it does seem to me that there are people who just decided they don't like Bitcoin, and they're going to throw arguments at it that it keeps surpassing. So are we going to have Bitcoin 20 years from now? I don't know. But again, that's something, just let people decide voluntarily.
Well, gee whiz, we pretty much agree on this. I was late coming to the Bitcoin party, I have to admit, because I saw it as nothing more than a tulip bubble. And then it dawned on me that Bitcoin is just people's natural attempt to circumvent this monopoly monetary system that we have right now. People don't have money, and so they've tried to devise some workaround. And here is this wonderful complementary currency that now, for the first time, is internet ready. So it can traverse national boundaries. And anyway, so all of a sudden I saw the utility of it. Now, as I dig into the cryptography of Bitcoin, I don't like so much what I see, but I like what I see in some of the other ones that have come. Bitcoin was the first, and I think it has some flaws in it. For example, one thing you talk about, it's actually a depreciatory currency. It's not going to have a stable environment. It'll reach a point where it goes down to zero, and then there's the question of bidding $1 million for the last Bitcoin. So because Bitcoins are lost through lost wallets, and they haven't made an allowance for that. But the newer cryptocurrencies, I favor the Quark because it has, it's the only version that has a cryptography that was developed after the NSA scandals, and so it has the best cryptography. It has a lot of other attributes. We won't go into it, but there are several others that I think will work very well because they answer this basic problem that Bitcoin has. But Bitcoin's going to be around in 20 years. Will it be around in 40 years? I doubt it. But there'll be so many others out there that it won't matter. Now, this is just a wonderful complementary currency, but it can't serve. You still have to have a national currency because national currencies support nationalism. And just like the Founding Fathers and their wisdom created the Constitution with a concept that's never mentioned in the document, but all of us would agree is absolutely basic to the document. That's the separation of powers concept. What is the separation of powers concept on the international level? For example, how was Hitler defeated? It was that independent nation states, still maintaining national sovereignty, ganged up and went and got the guy, routed him out. So to me, I wrote the first book on the New World Order of my generation. I wrote it in 1990, and I'm all about this deconsolidation of power thing, keeping power as spread out as possible. And once the independent nation state is eliminated, as you know, the globalists are attempting to do in 10 or 12 different ways. You've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you've got now TAFTA going on, and Obama's trying to ram them through on fast track. Once the independent nation state is sufficiently eroded, nothing can proceed but an ironclad world dictatorship. So we have to uphold the concept of national sovereignty, and to do that we still have to have a national money for each individual nation. However, the complementary currencies are a great alternative, a needed alternative, and now that it's internet ready, it's even better.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Do you have any final thoughts? Do you guys have any final thoughts that you want to tie it up with? Because then, if not, we'll move into the question and answer from the audience. Good? All right. Who has the first question?
Right here.
You, sir.
Two questions regarding the cryptocurrencies that you're on. Because I have been interested in that too, but I see that there are at least 70 that are listed now. Is there any limit to the number of cryptocurrencies that can be created? Because if there's no limit, then how would you create?
No, I mean, see, this is great. This is monetary experimentation at its finest. I mean, finally, people like us can try to experiment. And well, if we distribute them all real fast at the first, what are the effects? How do we prevent them from depreciating through lost wallets? Well, we'll try to do. It's just an experiment. It's a grand experiment. Some will last, some won't. Some will disappear off the face of the earth.
How do you feel about local currencies? Because they've been around for a goodly while.
Local currencies are great, but how many people here are involved in local currencies? I'd just like to see a show of hands. Just a few. I know from the Mountain Hours, what's that guy's name? Wayne Walton of Mountain Hours. He puts his heart and soul into trying to get people involved in their local currency. And his bucks, I mean, he spent like $30,000–$40,000 in the past few years trying to develop these local currencies. It's very difficult, but when you add the ability to transfer them over the internet, suddenly the utility is increased by several orders of magnitude.
I believe that Wayne came here and helped you guys set up a local Long Island Hours, didn't he?
Yeah, we tried to, but then something kind of came up, and it took our energy away for
Oh, is he organizing this event?
It's my next thing, okay?
Okay.
We're all going to be on Island Hours here.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Is it possible that the question go with that mic right there? We can't
Sure, if you want to come up and ask your
yeah,
question,
we
that's
can
fine.
hear them. Thanks so
Or we
much.
could just repeat them.
Repeat them.
Yeah, we can repeat them. That's fine.
Hi, Bill and Bob. If I could get to the gravamen of your disagreement, it seems to me that Bill is saying that we need some type of a sovereign entity, government, by the Constitution in order to make this thing work, of course under control of the Constitution. Bob, on the other hand, comes at it and says, well, the problem with that is, once you have a government, it's like a mafia protection racket, and somebody will always be able to buy them, whereas if they didn't have the power, there'd be nothing to buy. So that brings me to where your worldview is coming at this. So I'm just curious, is your worldview one based on a biblical perspective of the nature of man, or is it based on a more secular humanistic version of the nature of man, and whether man can live in a moral way in accordance with his obligations to the Constitution?
I went first last time. Okay. When I said I was going to repeat the question, that was before I heard it. So maybe the answer can be clear to people what the question was. So there's a lot there. Let me just clarify a few things. So it is true, I gather, that Bill is, believes in the Constitution and the type of federal government that it laid out. I think that was a great experiment, if you will, but if we're going to look at it as an experiment, it clearly failed. Right? We do not have divided government at this point. Clearly the executive branch does whatever it wants, and Congress rubber stamps it. They don't even bother declaring war anymore. And then moreover, even Bill's point is it's not even that the president's the one, right? It's not like there's a dictatorship and people talk, oh, Obama this. No, Obama's not the one calling the shots. It's shadowy bankers behind the scenes. And so to get to the question, you're right. I'm saying that whatever the virtues of that may have been, and it was a great experiment, and the founders had a lot of wisdom, but I'm saying we have more history to look at, and that didn't work. And if Thomas Jefferson and those guys couldn't set up a system that we think limited government, I don't think we're going to do a better job of it. And so just like there doesn't need to be an institution run by the government producing cars and so forth, I don't want the government in charge of money. Last thing on this, I mean, it is true, he and I have much different views about the nature of government, but strictly speaking, I could be a constitutionalist and just say, I don't want, economically, I think it's a bad policy, they should just leave money to the market. I mean, I could be a minarchist and say that. The last thing he asked was our views, so yes, I am a Christian, so I do think man is fallen, and presumably that does seep into my views about can we trust politicians and bankers and whatever. So yeah, that's if that helps you figure out where I'm coming from, that's true.
Well, let me take those in reverse order, and that's as far as humankind's fallen state. I don't believe in fatalism. We're also commanded to be watchmen on the wall, and so we have to. It falls on my head if I don't tell people to the best of my ability how I think things should be run. Then that falls on me. It's the watchman on the wall concept. So that's where that comes from. As far as failed, I mean, you might think it's failed, but the rest of the world doesn't think so. The rest of the world looks to us. It's a relative deal. They think this is the freest country on earth, and they're right. And the reason that we're having, the main reason we're having the problems we're having right now, the main defect in the Constitution is Hamilton insisting on giving the federal government the ability to borrow money. That should be job one, to a constitutional amendment to remove that.
Yes.
Doesn't the Constitution say that nothing but gold and silver?
No, that's a misreading of Article 1, Section 10. That's in the section that talks about state prohibitions. It has nothing to do with the federal government. Besides, there have been no states who have ever gone along with that in any case. That's just a misreading of Article 1, Section 10.
Gabe.
All right, I'm going to read a question that was given to me by a good friend of ours, for Bill Still. You have stated that we, the people, are the sovereigns of this nation and that all political and economic power should be decentralized. That being said, what are your feelings about growing popularities of alternative/local debt-free currencies that actually challenge the state/banking currency monopoly? That's the first question. I'll have another one. But.
Well, I already spoke to that. I'm all for it. I'm all for complementary currencies. It's just they've been so ineffective in the past. Poor Wayne Walton. I mean, like I said, he's poured his heart and soul and his wallet out to try to make them But if you've ever been involved, it's like pulling teeth to try to gel them together, whereas, you know, if you can sit at home and participate in this market via cryptocurrencies, you know, it works like that, so.
And the second question, you seem to agree with the Constitution's granting Congress the sole authority of currency issuance. Is this not a type of monetary centralization? In other words, if the government is run by plutocrats, how is granting the state a monopoly going to reform the system?
Good question. I think that's a great question.
Thanks, Dave. Think about that.
Yeah, I've got to think about that. I'm sorry, I can't answer it off the top of my head. There's a good answer to it, I just don't have it.
Perhaps we could do a follow-up in the future.
Sure.
I'll give you a written.
I'll do a YouTube.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I'll give you a copy of it later.
Got a question over here.
I would like to ask Bob, suppose we had a system that functioned, as you said, where the government no longer dictated the mode of the meeting of the currency, but the government would still have to collect taxes and would pay wages to its agents, and one begins to wonder, sort of how like the Roman soldiers brought the currency to Great Britain, wouldn't the, whatever form of currency the government itself chooses to collect taxes in, which it goes to the tally stick method in your video, wouldn't that start creating a demand in some sense for that particular currency, even if government isn't dictating what is and isn't currency?
Okay, yeah, so the question, in case you couldn't hear it, he's saying, even if the government wanted to follow my advice, when they you know, some people owe us taxes, wouldn't that have to be denominated in something, and so wouldn't the thing they picked, wouldn't that force people to have to use that? And then there's, a lot of people think that historically there's examples where you can see that, where it's through the taxation power that governments kind of force people to use a certain currency. Couple things. So first of all, if the government really is going to do what I say, there wouldn't be taxes. So that's, you know, the wise ass remark. But if you don't want to go that far, you just say, okay, let's say that, you know, they're going to be still there. They're going to be taxes, but they're willing to go this with you on the money aspect. Well, they could just denominate it in whatever the currency is prevailing of the day, or if there's multiple competing currencies, they could choose one that is fairly popular. And, you know, they could, like, right now you can be a U.S. citizen and go work in Europe and your salary is in euros. And that doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to pay taxes. It just means when you go to pay it, it gets computed in dollars using exchange rates or something, and then you take your euros and convert them into dollars and pay the IRS that way. So by the same token, if people in the United States were using 15 different currencies, and I don't know that they would, they might not be, they might all be using gold, they might all be using silver, what have you, but even if they were in this, you know, tricky scenario where people are using different currencies, the government could still just say, well, you have to pay us in the equivalent using exchange, you know, the average exchange rate between these two dates or something, and so you pay us in this. So it would just mean converting when you mail in your check on April 15th. It wouldn't mean that that forces everyone in their day-to-day transactions with the grocery store to use a currency, because once a year you have to settle up in this unit with the IRS.
Why don't we just all not send in our checks?
Well, I get the answer.
Oh, yeah.
Hold on.
Let Phil answer and then we'll...
Well, if government were to follow your advice, how would they do that? They'd have to pass legislation through Congress, wouldn't they?
Oh, look, a government. Oh, look.
Yeah. Okay. Secondly, tax.
Well, yeah, if you guys say, no, Bob, assuming the government's there, what do you do quick? And then I tell you, you can't say, ah, see, there's a government, ha.
Okay, well, my turn. Secondly, taxes. As late as 1900, 90% of the federal income was composed of tariffs and excise taxes. This was before the passage of the income tax law. Of course, now the free trade mantra is loosen the land, and is the justification for things like TPP, et cetera, and all that does is just allow corporate America access to the countries with the lowest slave wages. So I'm against this whole so-called free trade movement. Tariffs support nationalism, so I generally tend to favor that and have a new look at that, and just toss this whole free trade notion, free trade agreements out the window.
Okay,
I noticed one thing that you said before, and both of you had good points, and I agree with some of what you said and some of what you said, but I mostly agree with him. Now, what you said before was that, oh, if you look at our Constitution, if you look at the Articles of Confederation, and then you look at the Constitution that was put into place of that, that our experiment has failed. The experiment has failed, and if Jefferson and all these guys sat there and they came up with this idea and it failed, well, no, it's not a failure. If you have a lab environment, a controlled environment, which a completely free market system would be, it would be essentially controlled in chaos, right? You have a controlled environment, and then you set up an experiment within that environment, and then you have interlopers, say the Crown. You have outside entities that come in there and purposely subject that experiment to outside stimuli. You skew the results of the experiment. You can't stand there. You can't pour vinegar into baking soda, and then I come over there and stick my hand underneath the vinegar as it's going into the baking soda and say, ah, you failed your experiment. It didn't fizzle up, you know?
Yeah.
We have a system here that has been constant money interests, corporations, the Crown, various governments, and other entities have already gotten their hands into the Constitution, purposely skewed the objective of it, and then you have people that say, oh, you failed. You know, we didn't fail. You made us fail. You purposely and intentionally injected your, for better word, bullshit into our country, and then you bastardized our money, of all the ungodly things that you did, and then you have people that say, oh no, the only result there, the only plausible scenario is anarchy. But when you have anarchy, you have governments that pop up in place. You go to Somalia, there are governments there, they just don't call themselves governments, they call them warlords, you know? And you go to Afghanistan, yeah, oh, that's the warlord region. No, that's the region that has multiple little fiefdoms and warrior kings or whatever the hell they want to call themselves, and if they don't like what they set a rule and you violate that rule, you die. Or we rape your sister.
Let's give them a chance to respond. Before they do, one comment I would like to make is that the Constitution wasn't a quote-unquote antivirus software to prevent against tyranny. It failed.
But it's resultant people. It's check. Benjamin Franklin, or was it Thomas Jefferson? I'm not sure. They said, "What kind of government will you give us?" And he said, "A republic. If you choose to keep it."
Right.
We have not chosen. We've completely fallen into apathy, and that's our problem.
Yes.
Well, let's not degenerate to anarchy. Bob and Bill.
Okay. I am against warlords. It was Franklin. Look, the function again. You know, this is fine to debate this stuff because it's more fun talking about anarchy versus minarchy, but I do want to remind people that this is, you know, supposed to be about the proper monetary system, but it's fine to go ahead and talk about that. I mean, I brought up the issue of the Constitution. If the Constitution is so fragile that they're saying, well, yeah, if it weren't for the fact that there are bankers, the system would have worked. Well, there are going to be bankers after we do our reform movement, too. So if you're saying this would be great, so long as there are no bankers ever to try to bribe people, well then that's not a good system. All right, so I'm saying if the generation back then, if they didn't have the eternal vigilance, you know, to constantly refresh the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots and so forth, if they didn't have what it took, I don't think the Americans today have what it takes. And that's not fatalism, that's just saying that's a bad strategy, we need to rethink it. And
giving up would be better.
Okay, well, okay, in North Korea, they say, man, people are starving, but we just have to try centrally planning food distribution better. We just need to put the right people in charge of the government to distribute food. And someone else could say, well, maybe we should have the market do it. And they say, oh, you're just giving up then. You know, so I'm saying, you guys were just, a lot of you are just taking it for granted that the current system that we were taught in our school books is the right one. And I'm saying it's possible that that's not true.
Well, you're fighting me with the argument that, the only argument that I actually liked that you had. I said, I think that the market is the perfect solution to all of this stuff. But
No, but just stop right there. That's great. We can be friends.
The Constitution isn't only about economics and the market. You have jurisdictions, you have the separation of powers, and that doesn't deal with the market.
Look, guys, separation of power. The president right now in the New York Times, he has the power to send killer robots around Earth and kill any American citizen as long as he says, trust me, he was a terrorist. That's not separation of powers. That's not limited government. That's not a bicameral legislature. That's crazy. So I'm not saying my solution would be better. I mean, I think it would, but I can't prove it. But to talk about how we have a divided system and people around the world like us, people in Afghanistan and Iraq don't like us, or a lot of them don't. So I'm just saying, let's be honest and frank about how bad things are. You're right. I can't prove maybe my system wouldn't work, but let's not keep kidding ourselves that we have this checks and balances and you know we don't. The stuff that the federal government is doing right now, the founders would be horrified. And I don't just mean in terms of international policy, just even at the domestic level. The stuff they claim to have the right to do to people is far beyond what any framer would have thought conceivable.
Before we take the next question, I just want to recognize that there are two more legends in this room. Charlotte Iserby and G. Edward Griffin have joined us. And I hope everybody's going to stay for the whole weekend so that I get to hear them speak as well, because this is going to be a phenomenal weekend. And I want to do one more thing. Everybody take out your phones. Anybody who's on social media, take out your phones. I want you to take a picture right now of the panel, and I want you to tweet it out, Facebook it, Instagram it, tag it, tell everybody where you are, and that tomorrow they need to be here, and they need to go to SaveLongIslandForum.com so they can grab their tickets. Gigi and Ed and everybody else on the team worked very hard to bring in all these amazing people for the benefit of the Long Island community. So we need to be spreading the word about the event and getting it out there. And social media is the most powerful way I don't see any phones. Where are they? SaveLongIslandForum.com. All right?
Time out. I get to answer the last question.
Go for it.
Yeah, but before he does, could I say something in regard to, I really support your position, Mr. Still, and mainly because I've lived all over the world too. And I've lived a long time too. But the rest of the world loves the United States. I don't go for that. I know the Afghans, and I don't blame them. The Syrians, look what we've done. Look what our government's done. However, our form of government is respected. I can't think of a single country with people that I've gotten to know in foreign countries who don't just say, Charlotte. I know, this is a Muslim I knew was the Egyptian press attaché in Washington, or was in the State Department. Every time I'd meet with him, he'd say, I cannot believe that the government you've got, the Constitution you've got, every country in the world should have that Constitution. Right. So we can't, no way, don't even start, I don't care how bad it gets. Right. We cannot ever give up on that, because it was a genius document. We'll never find anything like that again. Right. We've got to start being active ourselves, and not
We've got to take it.
And guts. Have some guts.
You have to restore it, not
I get to say something?
I hope you all tweeted that.
I get to say something? First of all, Bob, I take offense at you categorizing me as a minarchist. I believe in a constitutional republic. I don't know what this minarchy thing means, but please, just for my benefit.
I think it means you don't eat meat.
Okay.
I would describe minarchy as constitutional.
Okay, well that's hilarious.
Second, I will be here all week.
The most important thing, the most important thing I think we can all do, and this is just rampant in this community, is to not exaggerate the power of the enemy. Exactly. Because if we exaggerate their power, the people will not fight. You have to give them hope, or they will not fight.
Right on.
That's all.
Thank you. Pat, you've been waiting for a while.
I basically he brought up what I wanted to bring up, that we're the ones that are not working it. It's not failing, we're not working it, and then that's what Charlotte said, so I'm just kind of putting an exclamation point to that. We got to work it.
Okay, so she was saying we have to work it. Again, in the broad picture, of course, and I agree with Bill, there's many millions of us, the people in charge, however you want to define it, it's a small fraction, and they have to, that's why they have to control the media and education and so on, because they know if they get their power from us, right? They need us to go to work, send in our taxes, and they don't want people to revolt and so forth. People just keep their head down. So we're all agreeing. It's just we're disagreeing over the right way to try to fix things. But I mean, I didn't do this personally, but I know lots of people, they really put their heart and soul in the Ron Paul campaign, just for example, whether you like him or not. And they were just astounded at how much people just cheated, like local party bosses, you know, just cheat. And so I'm just saying, I think you guys are going to spend your whole lives beating your head against the wall if you think there's a political solution to this. So I could be wrong, but that's just, I think that needs to be addressed or put on the table.
Bill.
Yes. From December 1913 to December 2013, yeah, you had the 100-year contract with the Federal Reserve. This morning, they were still here. They haven't packed their bags and left.
There was no contract.
Well, if there was a 100-year, if it's a lease, what is it?
No, there wasn't. It just wasn't there. I did primary source documentation on that.
And for more on that, you can go to JekyllIsland-themovie.com. Yes, sir.
I'm pretty new at this, so it might be a little bit of a broad idea. But Mr. Still, you said that a lot of the world is still looking to us. I'm in this room because I'm kind of biting my fingernails how to wake people up because our country's in national debt. So I'm curious, like, almost why is the world still looking to us if we have failed and it seems that one of the obvious, cures here is precious metals. Whatever way it's going to be implemented. Obviously, I said I'm, still new on this stuff, so that's for men like you to figure out. I want to.
No, I'm about done. It's for men like you to figure out.
I'm just curious. If it's so obvious that
and women.
I can easily understand precious metals are a key point of it. How is it not that other nations are looking to, to do that instead of looking to us like, hey, what's the Americans going to do? What are there other nations that are powerful, Russia, China, that are thinking about attaching their currency to precious metals and how that might affect us?
I don't know how to answer you. I think a lot of energy has gone into the crypto world as far as the people who are trying to experiment with monetary systems.
But by the way, so if you guys didn't hear that, he was saying if the rest of the world is looking at us, but aren't we kind of in a bad financial and fiscal situation? So doesn't that seem like a disconnect? More generally, let me just say, it's not that I look at the history of the U.S. and think, oh, this is a horrible country and they did a bad thing. It's more I'm saying what was great about the U.S. Constitution, for example, is that it limited the government. So I'm saying to realize that the Constitution largely said what the federal government cannot do to you. That was the beauty of it, that it restrained it, and that's what the founders were trying to do. And so I'm saying, isn't it possible that really what the correct solution is there should be no such thing as what we think of as the modern nation state, the way it's conceived. So there would still be rules and so forth. I'm just saying, though, that you're saying, oh, look around the world, all these other places are more horrible to live in. Yeah, because their states are more powerful and do things to their people that fortunately our government doesn't do to us yet, but they're moving in that direction. Right? Every day almost brings up new revelations of how they're spying on us and so forth, doing things that they themselves say are illegal. And they say, well, we're not going to prosecute ourselves. So again, at some point, someone said no matter how bad it gets, we can't give up. Well, in any other context, that would not be a very wise thing to say. That no matter how bad the system is, we're going to stick with it. And so I'm saying it's possible that that's true of this current form that we've all been taught is the right system. And that's not a coincidence that the government textbooks taught us this is the right system. Yes, over here.
Question on back to Bitcoin for 1 second. The idea of things like gold having intrinsic value beyond its trading value. How does that affect, because both of you seem to be at least partially in favor of digital currencies, how does that reconcile with, like Bitcoin, it's, I don't know, what do you call it, vaporware, you know what I mean? It's like, right, I mean, if how, you know what I mean, how does that compare, or what are the advantages and disadvantages versus something like a metals currency where it has an intrinsic value?
Well, there's two lines of thought, and that is that the money has to have intrinsic value, and then there's another line of thought that money only needs to be something that people agree to trade with, and so you either believe one or the other.
Does Bitcoin have an intrinsic value?
No, but people are agreeing to trade with it. Overstock.com just what's today? Today's Friday. A week ago, opened trading in Bitcoin. They now accept payment in Bitcoin for everything on their site. PayPal is about to do it. Amazon.com is about to do it. Many different nations are attempting to do it. It's just going to happen.
Bob, do you agree that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value?
Okay, yeah, so he was asking, I don't know if you guys heard about intrinsic value, the pros and cons compared to more traditional hard money. So yeah, there's pros and cons of both, and obviously, you know, it's not that a gold coin's going to just fall in the ocean or something, the ship sinks, but gold is more tangible, so that's an advantage, but there's other advantages with Bitcoin that people talk about, like I said, the finite supply. One anal point that, you know, economists, a lot of them, you know, recoil from the phrase intrinsic value, because value resides, you know, in your subjective mind and how you appraise something. And so it's not that a yellow hunk of metal has worth because of its atomic structure, it's because of people being able to use it in jewelry and so forth. So if that's what you mean by intrinsic value, then yes, it's true that Bitcoin doesn't do anything except serve as a medium of exchange. But like Bill said, if people use it, well then that's not a knock against it.
I guess the question was, doesn't make it unstable.
Doesn't make it unstable. That has no intrinsic value.
It does, but by the same token, gold right now, if let's say everyone's using gold coins, that the market value would be much higher than if people just used it for dental fillings and for jewelry. And so you could argue that it was unstable above that fundamental price. So, but that wouldn't stop it from being a good money.
I would argue that the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is the privacy that comes along with using Bitcoin. If anybody wants to get dessert is now on, but we have another question over here.
Everybody seems to realize that veering away from the law has been tough, but I haven't heard anything mentioned about the grand jury, about bringing all of the lawless elements of our society back into the law, whether it's under the Constitution or whether it's the branch of the government. And the grand jury is in our Constitution. Does anybody have an idea about the grand jury?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna say something about not necessarily the grand jury, just because I have to plead ignorance. I don't know a whole lot about it, but now I've lost my train of thought. That's what happens when I get as old as that.
No comment about the grand jury, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, like Bill, I don't have any specific legal thing to say about the grand jury per se, but again, I would just caution, there's all sorts of remedies people supposedly have to stop the government from doing something. And, you know, just to grab the example of the day, I mean, you could have video of police beating a homeless guy to death, and that doesn't mean they get in trouble.
The only way to bring justice to the courts who won't prosecute themselves is if we, the people, do it, and it's in there. It's in the Constitution. I haven't heard many people talking about it.
Well, what I was going to say is that one of the definitions, one of the essential ingredients of a free society is the rule of law.
Right.
And there are only two choices in this life: the rule of law or the law of the jungle. And I don't think anybody in here, anarchists included, would volunteer their families to go under the law of the jungle.
You have a question back here?
Yeah. I've mentioned the TPP a couple of times.
Right.
And my concerns with the TPP are internet freedom, food safety, worker control, benefits. My question to you is if you could summarize your concerns in a sentence, or what is your biggest concern with the
Could you repeat that? Nobody heard it.
Well, she's wondering what my concerns are with the And really my primary concern is it's not really a trade deal. It's It's an attack on sovereignty disguised as a trade deal. And really, we don't even know what's in it. No one has read the thing yet. The only thing that's ever come out is one chapter on intellectual property that WikiLeaks leaked out. And yet this thing is going to be rammed through Congress. And so, by definition, it needs to be killed.
We have one more question over here, ma'am. Do you have a question?
Oh, I have a comment.
Sure, come on, you're right here.
Hello. Well, to the comment about grand juries, a lot of you might not know this, but it is not true that you have to follow the judge's instructions on what evidence to allow and what evidence to ignore. So that's one thing. And my comment has to go to your feeling about government. We have to realize that all of us have some culpability. From our parents who used to tell us, oh, well, get a job with the government, whether state, local, or federal, you'll be set for life. Another thing is, somewhere along the way, we forgot about what the proper role of government is. And that took forms in expanding the government to fight poverty, fight racism, fight this thing or the other thing. So we really have to get back to what's the proper role of a constitutional government. And it's not to guarantee that life will always be free from trouble. It's to allow us to make whatever choices we want, so long as we don't harm or defraud other people.
Right. The reserve currency, could you talk about we're talking about economics, but the one 800-pound gorilla in the room is the loss of a reserve currency.
Could you guys comment on, the question is, what is their opinion on the fact that the U.S. dollar is no longer the world reserve currency?
Okay, so yeah, it's a part of what's going on. I mean, and if you go to my talk tomorrow, I'll talk more about this, is the unprecedented things that Ben Bernanke has done and that Janet Yellen is going to continue to do. And the odd thing is, how come we haven't seen gasoline go up to $30 a gallon? It seems like there's no problem with all this inflation. And so as the gentleman brings up, part of the explanation is because the U.S. is the world's reserve currency, so people just absorb it around the world and hold it. But that's maybe less and less likely. And so that's the issue, that if people decide they don't trust the dollar anymore, those will all come flooding back. So the problem with all that is, if it does flip, it's going to be quick, and so it'll be like the chickens coming home to roost very quickly. And so that's part of the reason that I'm going around the country and trying to get people to see the situation, that it's not going to just be a gradual thing. If I'm right in my diagnosis of what they've been doing, the unraveling would be really fast. So go ahead and keep drinking.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and thank you, Bob and Bill, for joining us. I won't be here until tomorrow this week, and we'll be at the Denver area all day also to talk to you. I just want to say, after this, we have a film clip festival right now. It's going to be in a few minutes with Charlotte Isabel. Kevin Miller and Jason Gomez are going to show film clips of movies that they have just recently produced and directed. And thank you, everybody, for coming. All right, so if you want to stay in more days because you're having a good time, we're selling tickets still, okay? Thank you.